Welcome to the Elokus podcast, and this is class number 19 in the discourse Vayedaber Moshe Roshei Hamatos, which is the 10th discourse in the overall book, B'Shashek Dimu 5672. And this is going to lead us into the last part of the discourse. It is the fourth class in chapter 40. And it starts the last paragraph in chapter 40, in which he is taking us back to the questions he asked at the beginning of the discourse, which are relating to the Torah portion. As we discussed earlier, that this discourse is an exploration of themes that stand independently, but yet because this is like extremely long, and the Rebbe Roshei, the author, would say these discourses every week. So he would add, after he developed the theme of the discourse itself, he spliced it, so to speak, and added in a beginning and an end every week in accordance to the Torah portion. So at this point is where he concluded the main theme of this discourse, which was the concepts of the idea of Maayon Mata, up and down, of an essential quality that there is in all the various different levels. There is up and down is not just more light and less light, but also fundamentally different as each level, a certain quality. And because again, this is all because we're discussing Or Pnimi, internal light, and an internal light, which has been the theme from the beginning of the book until now. Or he's tracing the internal light all the way up to the Or Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum, the Esespheres Agnuzos, the 10 hidden spheros, and all of that. And in the midst of that, he's talking about there is in Or Pnimi, there's higher and lower. There is a whole system that sets up, creates what we call Seder Ishtalshalos, an evolution of a higher level and a lower level, and so on and so forth. He explains what that means. And in the last discussion, we were discussing the difference between Chachma and Bina, not only that the difference between them is far more fundamental than just this is the Nakuda, this is the point where the light is so intense, and then you start fragmenting or breaking up the point, and therefore you're losing some of the light and it's getting dimmer, but it's not that way. He explained that Chachma is fundamentally a whole different experience than Bina. And the last thing we learned was that Chachma is an experience of the essence, and that's why it's like seeing something. When you're seeing something, you're experiencing the very substance of what you're seeing, at least in the mind, and Chachma is similar to physical vision, but it's the vision of the mind of the eye of your mind. And then Bina is like hearing about something where you are putting together pieces. You're living in the world of the descriptions of it, not the essence of it. As he refers to it as what's being revealed in Bina is the Metzios, the existence of something, which are its definitions, its properties, its limitations, its outer crust, and maybe more than just the crust, but not the very, very essential soul of it. The soul of something is revealed only when you're seeing it. When you look at a person and you see them, you get to see not just their external features, but you're seeing the entire human being. You're seeing, it's almost like you're seeing their soul. You're looking at a person, you can see their energy and sense their energy through looking at them. But when you're having someone describing a certain person, let's say for a shidduch information, you have to date the person to meet them. You can't just get descriptions and then marry them. It's actually for a prohibition. The Torah says you're not allowed to marry someone until you see them. Because when you see them, you get to know them. Based on that, he's wrapping it now back towards and here in this discourse, it comes together in such a beautiful way, because the discourse began on Parshas. This is a discourse that was said in Parshas Matos, deep in the middle of the summer. And over there, it discusses the mitzvah of vows and the prohibition of associated with a vow. When someone takes a vow, how you have to keep your word in the vow. And also the idea that a vow could be annulled. Okay. So in the beginning of the discourse, he asked, and here he's swinging back to explain that. And as I mentioned in last class, this from here to the end of the Maimer is very refreshing and very enjoyable, because I know what we've been learning up till now is very deep haskaladik concepts, which means deep intellectual ideas. And here it's going to come to a place of more practical, like direction in our everyday living. And it's going to talk about something phenomenal regarding our interaction, our relationship with food, primarily with food, but it will all physicality. And he's going to explain there's a fundamental difference of our relationship with the material world and the caution we need to have when our spiritual enlightenment is an enlightenment of bina. When we are in the bina, when our state of spiritual consciousness is a bina consciousness, then our interaction with the material world needs to be done with enormous amount of precaution and enormous amount of why? Because our light is not bright enough in our soul. And when our light is not bright enough in our soul, we can be fooled. In other words, there's certain temptation or certain elements in the world that can darken and can confuse us and distract us and throw us off. So one has to proceed with enormous precaution, including at times that you have to take a vow. And the idea of taking that vow means to limit yourself in what areas of the material world you're allowing yourself to venture into, and which elements of the material world you feel you deem is too dangerous, because if you're going to go, then you might slip and fall. Or the person is in a lower spiritual state and has less clarity, less divine clarity. But when you have an expansive consciousness and you're experiencing a deeper experience of the divine, as we're going to see, the experience of Chachma, which is a world, you have such, like my father likes to use the term, clarity of reality. You see things with such a clear, crispy, and sharp way that you can allow yourself to venture into places that might usually have darkened, can create a danger to you, but you're not afraid of truth even in that darker place. And that is the reason why you can annul that very vow that yesterday was yesterday you were called for to make a vow, and you took a vow, and now you can annul that vow. And that's kind of the idea which he's explaining. And with this, he's using the concept that we discussed earlier, how Chachma is so much higher than Bina, and the it's a different type of, it's like being in a complete different frequency. It's like being in a whole different experience. It's not just brighter and darker. It's not a relative difference. It's a whole beyond relative. It's a quantum elevation when you enter into Chachma versus when you're in Bina. And it's a whole different scope of operation, because your consciousness in a whole different reality, and therefore your entire equilibrium and your entire what do we call it, sense of reality shifts. And in that sense, one's connection to the world is different, is very different, fundamentally different. And you can live, you can live in a different with in other words, you don't have the restrictions that you need when you're only in a Bina consciousness. That's kind of, you don't need the guardrails. That's kind of the idea. So in the beginning of the discourse, he asked a few questions where Moshe Rabbeinu introduces the mitzvah of vows. Number one, he speaks, particularly by this mitzvah, he speaks el Roshei Hamatos. He speaks to the leaders of the tribes, which is unique because all the other mitzvahs, Moshe is also speaking to the Jewish people, yet he doesn't speak to the leaders of the tribe. He speaks to the tribe, speaks to all the Jewish people. How come? Like Hashem usually says, Daber el bnei Yisroel, speak to the Jewish people. Why over here does the Torah emphasize that Moshe speaks to the leaders of the tribe? The other thing is that he says commanded, and it does that hadavar. This is the matter. So why the emphasis on the zehadavar right over here? That was kind of, let me see the questions that he asked at the beginning. Yeah, those were the two questions. So now we'll understand and we'll come to answer all of this. Now, based on everything we discussed earlier. Masha Pashas Nedarim, we'll understand why the Torah portion of vows, Roshei Hamatis. Hadavar, this is the matter. In Yadua, for it is known, he's going to now explain the Kabbalah, the mysticism of a vow. What happens when a person makes a vow? When a person makes a vow really means, it's not an oath. An oath is usually, oath means that you are promising or like taking upon yourself a commitment. That's what an oath means, a commitment by oath to behave in a certain way, to do something or not to do something. That's called a shavua. That's called an oath, which means you're not impacting or affecting anything outside of yourself but yourself. The oath, in an oath, it's a little bit like you're binding yourself, you're tying yourself, you're knotting yourself to a high spiritual source. You're doing something, you're knotting yourself to God, and with that knot, you are preventing yourself or to go against. In other words, when does a person take an oath? Usually when there's something difficult that they need to deal with, and either they feel that something is pulling them and they don't want to get pulled into that. They don't want to be drawn into, let's say, another person's traps and another person's whatever, but they're very likely, they have weakness. They feel weakness that they're going to fall to someone else's shenanigans, let's say, or an object, whatever it is. So they, in order not to bring out the strength, so they tie themselves to God. They make a commitment to God, which is really bonding to God, binding themselves with Hashem to give them that power to be able to overcome that whatever force that is seeking to swallow them. Okay, or the opposite. If you need to go do something and you're afraid, you're intimidated, you're uncomfortable, whatever it is. So you commit yourself by, again, charging yourself with a promise. You made a promise to God, so now you have no choice. You have to go ahead and do so. But the entire divine connection is taking place in the person by you. It's unrelated to the things around you. A vow is the opposite. A vow is called in Talmudic terminology, it's an isser chefza. A vow means you are saying that this particular thing is prohibited on you. For instance, let's say you are told by the doctor not to eat sugar, and you are you have a sweet tooth and very, very much love desserts, and every chocolate and every sweet candy is kind of irresistible to you. So you feel you don't have the energy. Every time you see it, you're seduced by it. So how do you strengthen yourself? So you make a vow and you say, all candy or all sugar is prohibited upon me, like a sacrifice. Now it's interesting, but really now, unlike, and it's important to understand that what really happens over here is that you're actually drawing down holiness. Because just like when a person says that this animal is going to be sanctioned as a sacrifice, which I'm going to use it as a korban. I'm going to bring this up as a sacrifice in the holy temple. That animal becomes holy, and if the person shares the wool of the animal or milks that animal or whatever it is for their own benefit, they are in desecration of holiness, because they elevated this object or this living being, and it has a certain divine sanctity to it. Now, when a person is saying that this chocolate bar is prohibited upon me, like a sacrificial animal, even though they're not going to offer this as a sacrifice, they're not going to take it to the temple, it has a certain holiness in as much as that person is concerned. To other people, not. In other words, if you made a vow that you're not going to eat the chocolate bar, it doesn't mean that your cousin who comes to your house can't eat it. It's to them, it's not holy, but to you, it is holy. How that works exactly, but that's the way it is. Which means that you're extending a certain godliness to it. You're bringing down a certain holiness, and that now you cannot. So it's not just, oh, now I made a vow, so I have to keep it. You now there is a far stronger, just like you wouldn't entertain, God forbid, to steal something from God. You wouldn't go into the synagogue or to the holy temple and take something that belongs to God. It's like walking into the king's palace and you need a spoon for your to eat your soup, and you go into the king's dining room and you grab a spoon. That is terrible. This is one of the king's china. Like, how dare you take it? If you ask permission and they gave permission, it's one thing, but you just go and help yourself. You can't do that. It belongs to the king. Now, okay, something belongs to God. How dare I use it? That's what creates the preventiveness from the person of touching this thing. That's the idea of a vow. So he's now going to explain in Kabbalistic terminology, how does this take place? Where are you, from which level of the divine are you bringing down sanctity and holiness to affect this prohibition, to create the sanctity? So he says, it is known, the nedarim, that all vows hem bebina. The person is tapping the divine energies of bina. Now, how do we know that? In other words, you're eliciting a certain godly influence from bina, and you're drawing that down onto those sweets. Okay, if we give the example we said earlier. And as it says, now how do we know this? It says, Kol hanoider ki'ilu noider b'chaya melech. It's a statement of Sifri. Sifri is a certain midrashic compilation that is on the book of, in this case, the book of Bamidbar, yeah. So in the book of Bamidbar, in the Sifri, it says that anybody that takes a vow, it's as if they are made the vow in the life of the king. Pretty serious. It's like, it's not just saying something. You are connecting and bonding yourself with the life of the king. And if God forbid you're violating the vow, you are causing a blemish in the very life force of the king, not just, but in the life force of the king. That's really, really, when the king over here is God. So, but he explains, everything that the sages say has much deeper meaning than what we might think it has. Very deep godly meaning. So, it says like this. It's like as if you're taking a vow in the life of the king. So he explains like how do we get that the life of the king means bina? He says, Melech is b'china zeir anpin. We know that the 10 sefirot above are divided really into four. We can divide them into four categories. There is Chachma, which is called father. There is Bina, that's called mother. And then there is the 6 emotions called Ze'er Anpin, the small face. And then there is Malchus, kingship. Okay. Now, Malchus is really referred to as the queen. Malchus she's part of the royal family, but she's the queen. The king is really her husband. The Ze'er Anpin, the 6 emotions are called Melech, Malka in Zohar. She's called Malkasa, the queen. Okay. So, and we know, for instance, that the mitzvot, which all the 613 mitzvot, or the 248 positive mitzvahs, 240 are all, what are the mitzvahs? What are the spiritual divine roots of every mitzvah? It's one of the midot, one of the elements of the divine emotions. The divine emotions, the Ze'er Anpin, is made up of 6 emotions, but really it also has a pair of mochin. That means in addition to Chachma and Bina, which are above the Ze'er Anpin, the Ze'er Anpin itself can't just is a full partsuf. It has a full configuration. It has a Chachma, Bina, and Das as well. So together, the Ze'er Anpin is 9 sefirot. It's 6 plus 3, which is 9. Now, those 9 sefirot, each one has all the other in them. So 9 times 9 is 81. And in each one of them, there is the beginning, the middle, and the end. in every one of these spheres. You have to triple that. I'm not going to go into the explanation of all this. I'm sure in the course of this long book that we're going to be learning, that we're learning over here, we're going to come to deep explanations on this as well. I'm sure it's I think it's impossible that this idea will not be touched upon later in the book. So it's 3 times 81 brings you to 243. 3 times 81. So we can really say is that the limbs of God are 243, because the limbs are the emotions, and the emotional structure, if you break it down to all the categories and subcategories, is 243. And then you add another 5 related to the 5 chasadim. Why, where, and when, it's not important for today's class. So that brings you to 248. So it's explained that the 248 mitzvahs, the Zohar says, are the 248 limbs and organs of the Ze'er Anpin. But the Zohar says it's the 248 limbs of the king. That's what Eivarim de Malka. So you see from here that the Ze'er Anpin is called the king. Okay. So now we know who the king is. God is manifesting as king. These are the emotions, the 6 emotions. 6, which are really, you can include, as we said earlier, 9, but generally refer to them as the 6 emotions. Now, that's the king. But the Zohar says, and the Sifri says, and it's also a statement in the Zohar, that if you made a vow, you're making the vow in the life of the king. So that means that the life of the king is above the king. The life of the king means where the king is deriving his energy from. So where does the Ze'er Anpin receive its input from? The Ze'er Anpin receives its input from the Bina, because what's feeding the Ze'er Anpin? The emotions. The Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, they are deriving their influence, and they're from Bina. It's like we discussed many times. We even just had this in our learning, in our own emotions. Bina Liba. What inspires our emotions? How do we have a love to something, or a fear of something, or a compassion towards something? There is always a convincing argument. There is a reasoning. There is a behind the scenes conviction of the mind that this thing is good, this thing is not good. So the intellect produces the emotions. That means that the intellect is considered the life force, the chayim, the life, the neshama of the emotions is Bina. Bina is called the soul of the emotions. She's the life of the emotions. So when it says someone makes a vow, kilu noidar b'chayei hamelech, it really means that the energy of a vow, we said earlier, when you're taking a vow, you're drawing sanctity and holiness upon whatever it is that you are placing the vow upon. From which level are you drawing that from? From the life of the king, which Kabbalistically is to be understood. You're tapping the energies of Bina, and that's how you are, and that's the sanctity of that which is now being prohibited. Okay, let's read. The melech is the element of the Ze'er Anpin. The Chayei Melech and the life of the king, B'chinas Bina. That's the Bina. Okay. First, we're going to see. First, he's going to give us the Kabbalistic structure, the formula, and later he's going to give us an amazing understanding of what this all means. Okay, so let's continue. Now, we said earlier, a person can make a vow, right? And you place it. But then, the next phase regarding vows are that you can annul a vow. One has the ability to annul a vow. Who can annul a vow? A person themselves can't annul their vow. They need to take it to a great expert. The expert is a great rabbi who has permission from the great Beis Din, who has smicha directly from Moshe Rabbeinu, which means not directly, but through a direct chain. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses gave smicha to Joshua, to Yeshua, and Yeshua passed that smicha down, which means the authority to govern with halachic law, and passed it down through the generations. And anybody that was given that koach, that power, someone who's an expert in the laws of vows, and there's a certain method that Moses gave down in which you can discuss the nature of the vow with whoever took the vow, and a vow is like a knot. In other words, and this great rabbi has the ability to unknot the knot, to annul the vow. It's called heter nidarim, which you need to go to a yachid. You can do it to a person, a yachid mumche, someone who has the expertise to be able to do this. So what is the spiritual dynamic. If the vow is not just a human knot, but a vow is a certain holiness and a godliness that's drawn down upon that object, which makes it like a sacrifice, as we discussed earlier, which is coming from the life of the king, which is bina. How in the world do you just dismiss that? The answer is, in order to dismiss it, you have to draw from a place that's even higher than bina. And that is what the Chacham does. The Chacham is Chacham. What is Chacham? Chacham means wise. That means that his energy he's plugged in. He, as a physical human being down here below, his neshama, his soul, is plugged in to a place higher than Bina. He's plugged into Chachma. So we're going to see that's why he needs to have smicha from Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe is the level of Chachma. And he receives this energy of Chachma. Chachma is higher than Bina. And therefore, by eliciting this lofty and very high divine light from the Chachma, we can undo the knots and even these vows that were established through the downloading of Bina, through bringing the energies of Bina that established the vow and established the prohibition. You can now annul that prohibition only from a place that's above Bina. In other words, Chachma has veto power over Bina. That's the idea. And the Chacham Amatiras Neder, and the Chacham and the wise man that annuls the vow, this person is coming from Chachma, and he infuses his Chachma light onto the person who now proclaimed the vow, and onto the bad person, and also onto the object that the vow has taken effect on. And through that, he eliminates that vow. Obviously, he has to follow the laws of Torah and do it based on those laws, and that's how he can do it. And with this, we'll understand this whole idea of Moshe speaking to the heads of the tribes, and he's saying, Zehadavar, this is the matter. But Inyan, who when they understand this, he's going to explain to us a phenomenal explanation in the nature of why one would take a vow in the first place. Because in order to understand the reason and the purpose of a vow, and why the Torah sanctions a vow and allows for vows, and so on, this whole idea, we need to understand in general what our relationship should be with the material elements in this world. The material elements in this world, are they good or bad? Now, obviously, there are certain material elements in this world that the Torah says are toxic, dark, and that's all the elements that are not kosher. So all elements that are not kosher, vows don't apply to, because it's not kosher. You can't come and say that pork, I'm now making this pork, prohibiting me with a vow, because the pork is prohibited without your vow. So vows don't even take effect on it. The question over here is, how about a kosher piece of beef? That's where vows apply. A person can say, I don't want to eat meat. Or not just, I don't want to eat meat. That's like that's an oath. But if you say that meat is prohibited upon me, that's the vow. So we need to understand this general idea of what should be a person's relationship with all the material, physical pleasures and delights of this world that are kosher. The Indian and the idea is, where he's going with this is a basic concept. Those who studied Hasidus and Tanyan are very familiar with this. And that is that really all material, physical aspects of this world that are kosher, it doesn't mean that it's not dangerous. Kosher means that you have that in its current state, the natural state of every material object of this world is that it is in an unholy state. However, that does not mean we shouldn't engage with it. Quite on the contrary, it's precisely because it's unholy that we need to engage with it, because we are agents of holiness. And how is the world going to become holy if we don't engage with it? Our work is to live in this material, physical world that's not holy and infuse it with holiness. However, we have to be aware that sometimes gets challenging, because the unholy nature of the world can sometimes have the opposite effect. In our interaction with these potentially unholy items, sometimes when we are not strong enough, the impurity that's within this physical object can, instead of us elevating the object into holiness, the object can drag the person down into its unholy place and contaminate the soul and pervert the soul and make the soul become disconnected from God. So he says that all the dvarim gashmim, everything physical in this world, hem tachas mamshelas klipas noga, are under the dominion of what's called klipa. Klipa is a shell that obscures and hides God. However, if it's part of the kosher part of the world, which is actually most of the physical universe, besides animals and mainly a lot of animals, but in terms of everything else, all minerals and all most vegetables and vegetation and so on, it's all from the noga. What's noga? Noga is a redeemable type of a klipa. It's a klipa, it's an unholiness, but it's very, very elevatable. Noga actually means it's a glowing shell, which means there is a lot of potential of light in it. You just have to but still one has to remove the outer shell of it and extract its good potential. And he says, Shanoga ma'uriv toivera, that the klipa of noga is a mixture of good and bad. That means it has a good potential, and our work is to actually access the good in noga and reveal it. And when we do that, we eliminate the unholiness of it, and we've redeemed the part of this world and made this part of this world holy, and we fulfilled our purpose in this world. And because this noga has good inside of it, it's at times it can be included in holiness. However, that's not to dismiss the other side. There is negativity in the noga as well. Because there's also ra in the noga. Let's take as simple as an apple. The apple that is a Fiji apple, good delicious apple, is unholy because there's nothing about it right now that is screaming, that is revealing God. It's a physical item saying that's just part of the physical material world that is not advertising God's existence. Unless we approach it with mindfulness, we already are conscious of God. We look at the apple from our godly lens, and we say, you too are creation by God, and therefore I'm going to transform you into a godly energy. How am I going to do that? If I eat the apple and make a bracha on that apple, and then use that apple energy that I'm going to convert. When we eat food, we convert the energy of the apple and turn that food into energy in which you use that energy to serve Hashem, to recognize God and to serve Him, whether by learning Torah and doing mitzvahs. You've now transformed that good potential in that apple into holiness and elevated a piece of this world to God. However, it's possible that a person can eat the apple and totally forget about Hashem. And the apple has within it the ability to corset a person. But because there's bad in that apple, sometimes actually the apple can drag a person down into the three impure klipot. The three impure klipot is a level lower than noga. It's the non-kosher realm that is anti-God completely. So what happens is when a person, since there is a exit ramp from the noga into the three impure klipot, and if a person is completely unaware and completely not cautious, then every interaction with something as innocent as an apple can God forbid, open up the door to the three impure klipot and drag the person with it to the impure klipot. How does that happen? When a person is completely oblivious to anything godly when they're eating the apple, and on the contrary, they're eating it just with a physical gusto and an enjoyment, and not connecting that enjoyment to God, then that enjoyment itself, it coarsens the person's sensitivity and makes the person more forgetful of God, less godly conscious, and even prone to do a sin. That's every time one engages with the material world and does not elevate. And there are times where you can leave something exactly where it is. It's not elevated, but it's also not dragged down. But when there is physical pleasure and especially if it's accompanied by some type of a lust, some type of a taiva, that adds more impurity to the person. And both the apple and the person eating it we don't see it, but that's what happens, are now in a more ungodly state that they were before, because they activated the three impure klipot, that the negative of the noga, which the negative of the noga is a first cousin, so to speak, with the three impure klipot, and you're already communicating with those three impure klipot. The alkei nikra, and that's why the noga is called la tacherev misapeches. We're just going to conclude with this for today. It's called the flame. It says Hashem put outside of the Garden of Eden this, like when he chased Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, to protect the garden, he put this la tacherev, this flaming sword, hamisapeches, that converts back and forth. So in Kabbalah it explains that this is this klipas noga, that the reason when we say it converts, it means it can be elevated into holiness, but it can also be drawn down into some kind of a dark satanic type of a place, into the snake's realm. Kenoida as it is now. And so we finally realize only here that something as simple as a coffee in the morning, or an apple, or a tangerine in the afternoon, or a strawberry has such, one has to be so cautious, because everything in this world is part of this noga experience, and depending on where we steer our consciousness and interact with it, and therefore we'll see that sometimes a person might say, I need to abstain, and kind of create certain abstinence, because they're feeling that they're not interacting correctly with things, as we will see, and how this is all done, and we'll connect it to Chachma and to Bina, Be'ezras Hashem, in the following classes.